Welcome. So the question on the table today is why meditate? Why? And one of the things that's very specific to the traditions that I was trained in, um, which is to say, it's not exactly this way in all Buddhist points of view, but there's a very high onus put on motivation and also answering the question of why we're doing the meditation. I think I studied for a while in Zen communities, which I love, and I think that's really tremendous. But they don't ask those questions. They just plop you down and put you in front of the white wall and have you sit and shut up and not move. And I would have, when I was at the Zen monastery, I would have my, one-on-one Madoka-san with the senior teachers, and we'd have these like little, interviews, and they're very kind of formalized. And the interviews were always like, just keep meditating. I was like, yeah, but because my brain likes to engage and likes to figure out what it's doing. But interestingly enough, the teachers that I studied most directly with at Trungpa Rinpoche and his lineage, that very much onus on using your critical intelligence, using your brain to try to figure out how to stop using your brain so much, if that makes sense. So, the idea of actually knowing why we're meditating is really important, because meditation just doesn't have to be a rote situation. I remember a teacher once saying it's kind of like the monk frog complex, where you're sitting there just like a frog, looking up at the sky, doing your mantras, expecting the blessings to fall down in your life to get better. And actually, we could look at it a little differently, as though we are actually evoking a higher intelligence in our mind, evoking our higher wisdom, invoking, and actually allowing ourselves to be able to open our eyes and see what the path is. So I recommend, as was recommended to me, that every meditation session could begin with just a little self check-in, you know, a little sense of how are you doing? How are you feeling today? Having a sense of, what's going on with you. And you've heard me tell the story of the horse, and my Tibetan teacher telling me about how horses aren't just transportation devices like they are in the movies, where you just jump on them and travel to the next thing. That actually, if you really love a horse and you're really a horse person, you have a connection to the horse, you actually introduce yourself in a way. You treat the horse with respect and say, I'm here, and touch the horse's flank, and make perhaps whatever eye contact or physical contact that a human and a horse can make before you actually, sort of with the horse's permission, mount the horse, and the two of you create a symbiotic situation where you're working together. It's not you just driving the beast, so to speak, but it's two beings learning how to be sentient together. In the same way, that's how we can relate to ourselves in meditation practice. Instead of just like jumping on the cushion and going, okay, now I just, not even really knowing what we're doing or why we're doing it. We could check in and be like, hey, good morning. Have you had your tea yet? I always bring my tea to the cushion. It's the tradition that I've done. I love doing that. So I wake. Sometimes I have like kind of morning chants that I might do first, and just a second of silence. But then I'll go and make my tea and bring it back to the cushion for my more formal meditation. And I love starting my meditation by just drinking my tea a bit and kind of having a non-discursive conversation with myself. Non-discursive meaning not just all over the place, but actually a contemplation, if you will, looking at, talking, and maybe reciting the chants. Usually that's what I'll do, is do some chants or some opening prayers. By then the caffeine has done its job and I'm kind of waking up, and I can put the tea aside and do my formal practice. But I always give myself that time to kind of relax. And obviously there are mornings when we don't have that time and we have to just move forward. But I think it's still super important to sit down for even 5 minutes to just connect in with oneself. And I think that's more important than any ensuing meditation we might do, is that synchronization and that connection with our own heart that we could make, checking in with ourselves. To make that process easier for me to communicate with you about, and also easier maybe for you to remember or do, you could break your check-in into 3 possible situations, like how am I feeling in my body? Am I stiff? Am I tight? How am I feeling in my emotions? What's going on in my brain right now? And just acknowledge these things, and nothing has to change or fix. And that's another big mistake I think people make on a path of meditation, is believing that they have to change things, or that they should somehow be more like the Buddha and less like themselves, You know why, if you ever seen a statue of the Buddha or pictures of the Buddha, and they're always still and quite regal, and you know why that is? Because they're statues. They're not, right, human. So the Buddha, I'm sure, scratched his nose and occasionally, passed wind, and, might have even giggled inappropriately. We're humans. We have human feelings and human expression. Now, again, drawing my experience from the Zen tradition, they don't appreciate any of those things. And they did want me to be pretty still. And I did the best I could to comply, because I really felt like I wanted that level of training. But if you go to a Zen monastery and you see the monks, the practitioners, the teachers, the people so still and so silent and so quiet, it is really awe-inspiring. It's absolutely amazing. By the same token, and I feel so fortunate that I had both trainings, if you go to a Tibetan monastery, you're going to see people sitting there talking, and incense and smoke and chickens coming through and dogs barking in the yard, because monasteries in the Tibetan tradition are community centers and are social centers. And meditation is a place for everybody to come in and do their practice, and they come in and out and doors bang and people are full of life, and they'll adjust themselves in their seat until they find the appropriate balance that they need to quiet the body in order to quiet the mind. What I've heard said, and these I'm just expressing 2 different kinds of trainings that I happen to be familiar with. There are many others along the spectrum, but I've heard it almost said that one is working with the externals, start with that, and then eventually the internal becomes quiet. That's the Zen approach. Just sit there, be silent, and eventually the mind begins to silence itself, right? The Tibetan tradition, I think, is different, particularly the Shambhala tradition, which I was trained in, the westernized version of it, which is the sense of like, move, adjust, find your center so that the external begins to settle and meet the internal. So it's more like the internal first, that you're finding your comfort with yourself. You're finding your connection to yourself. Or as they say in the tradition, your basic goodness, your absolute fundamental sense of self-regard, confidence, goodness, the inner compassionate being. So somewhere with all the craziness and the bells and whistles of our life, inside there is the seed of bodhicitta, or awakened heart, that we could begin to develop a connection to and actually gain confidence in, that we actually become confident that we are Buddha, in fact. And Buddha is not just the name, it's not just the title, it's not a descriptor, it's an actual term that means awake. And that there is a part of us that is completely awake. A part of us, it's like the big blue sky. And we get very fixated on the clouds. And is that a dragon or a turtle? Or looks like my grandmother smoking a cigar. And the more we look at the clouds, the more we can manipulate them to look like things that we feel expressed however we're feeling at that time. And it all seems very real to us. The meditation practice is about just releasing that grip that we have and being able to see things from a larger perspective, to be able to zoom out. When in doubt, zoom out. Zoom out, as Reggie Bot would say. That sense of the 30,000-foot perspective, being able to just see with a little distance, so we're not so impacted by everything in the mind. We can begin to see thoughts arise, see our desires, see our feelings, see when we start to begin to attach to things, and maybe gain the kind of control over ourselves that allows us to just say, okay, stop. And when we could do that, it actually decreases the anxiety that we put ourselves through when we're constantly gripping to our thoughts. We decrease the feeling of panic, nervousness, the heavy weight that we have to do everything right, that we go through our life with, begins to start to diminish, and we start to inch slowly toward this idea of liberation. Well, that sometimes works for us. Like, I'm going to liberate this morning, but sometimes that doesn't work for us. And if we really want results in meditation, then the idea is to do this every morning. So when you don't have time, at least the brief check-in, at least 5 minutes, 10 minutes to sit down with yourself and just connect before you go running and screaming out the door, and you're disconnected the whole day. To actually synchronize and set up a paradigm whereby we could come back to that synchronicity, reconnect to ourselves on the subway, on the street, at the red light, wherever the pauses or breaks are in our life, we could actually begin to connect to them and find some sense of elegance in our traverse through our life. That sounds really exciting and kind of a beautiful way to look at the meditation. But that can only really start to happen for us when we do it regularly. We make a commitment to do it every day. And when we do that every day and we check in with ourselves every day, we're going to find we have different needs each day. That some days our brain just won't stop. Some days our heart just feels broken and achy. And some days our body is just so stiff and tired. Conversely, there are days when we might feel completely spectacular in our body, or emotionally settled or clear in our mind. But these things tend to be different orientations for our practice. Rather than things we have to shift or change to be good like a Buddha statue, what we could do actually is check in with ourselves and motivate ourselves appropriately. The base motivation of the teachings on the 3 motivations is that we meditate to feel good, to feel better. Some people, and I was definitely in this category, began meditation to save our life. because our lives were so chaotic, our minds so disordered, our world so difficult, our hearts so broken, that we actually needed meditation to calm and cool ourselves, to bring ourselves back to wholeness and completeness. The base meditation is that we meditate to make ourselves feel better, to make ourselves healthy and whole and complete. However, if that's all meditation was, then the first time we became unhealthy or unhappy or incomplete, and while we were meditating or in the day we were meditating, we might feel betrayed. We might feel like it's not working. That's very brittle, it's almost. It's very, very, very kind of superficial. I want to feel better. So I'm using the meditation as a self-help technique. Well, that's okay, but what happens when something deeper comes up in our heart? What happens when something inside us starts to move that's deeper than just the self-help thing? That's where the second level of motivation comes in. The motivation to actually liberate ourselves from the difficulty of our psychological state. And some people have trouble with drinking, but most of us have trouble with thinking. We get as addicted to thinking as an alcoholic does to drinking. We get as addicted to thinking as a heroin addict does to their drugs. The thinking, the thoughts, the cycles that repeat themselves are actually more deeply embedded in the mind that just needs to feel better, you know? So if we made a commitment to actually uncover the damage on a deeper level and to begin to restore and reconnect with ourselves more deeply on the level where we were actually injured, where we were perhaps traumatized, on levels where we're actually motivating unhealthy behavior in our life, then that is pretty exciting and extraordinary in a way. If we want to, they would say traditionally, attain enlightenment. Now, it's a very arch term and that's open to huge debate, but I would say that we just simply want to wake up and wake up on a deep level, wake up in our full heart, not just our brain paying attention, but that we want to bring our heart into it and actually feel a real deep connection to that. If we had that motivation, it's called the great motivation, so to speak, right? We actually might be okay with meditation that hurt. We might be okay if things didn't go perfectly. We might be okay with our resistance, with not wanting to practice because we had made the commitment to go a little deeper with our practice. So it doesn't always have to be cool. It doesn't always have to be groovy. It doesn't always have to be good. If we go to the gym to work out a little bit and we just lift a few light weights here and there, we get a lot out of that. There's a lot to be said for that level of kind of work at the gym. But if you really want to become a bodybuilder, if you really want to become an expert at any of the physical activities in one's life, there's probably not a lot of bodybuilders in this group. So, but let me say, you know, if you really want to become a marathon runner instead of just a jogger, right? Then some of your training is going to hurt. Some of your training is going to feel bad, even, right? You're going to be running for hours and hours and hours to become a marathon runner. Very different than jogging 20 minutes a day to just stay in shape, which is great to do. But if you really want to go deeper and really kind of become an athlete, then the training has to go beyond feeling good and maybe push your boundaries a little bit. Does that make sense? So the great motivation is to really wake up. And that means it could hurt or it could feel good, but that's not the point. The point is to keep going. The point is to keep developing ourselves. And the point is to keep deepening our practice to where we have a really kind of strong practice. That's pretty cool. And if we were to do that practice, we could oscillate back and forth. So there may be days when we feel kind of crappy and we don't want to be a marathon runner. We're lucky just to get out of bed. So we go back to that first level of motivation and just try to do anything to make ourselves feel okay, you know? And if it comes down to just reading a book or just being kind to ourselves or listening to a podcast, any of those things are better than getting lost in aggression or feeling like we're not working or we're not on the path. That first level of motivation, anything we need to do, squirming, moving, adjusting ourselves to get our seat happening. The second level of motivation, though, to begin to settle down and really deepen into the path so that we could say that we really are on a path of waking up, which is rarefied, which is not always pleasant, which is challenging. That level leads to the third level, which is the greatest motivation altogether. And I'm sure you can guess what that might be, right? That the greatest level of motivation is if we do all of that work for the benefit of the planet, we do all of that work for the benefit of other beings. Or maybe all of that work just for the benefit of your spouse, or just the benefit of your family, but just begin to bring it out into a world of service where we're doing our practice to actually make our world, either locally or globally, a better place. That is considered the greatest level of motivation. The world, I think, and maybe I'm overstating this, maybe I'm being a little too dramatic. Somebody could cue the background music here, but I think the world needs us. It needs the people that are willing to try to wake up, pay attention. It needs people who can be compassionate. It needs people who are not just grabbing and taking. The planet needs our care and it needs our awareness. And meditation starts with mindfulness that develops awareness, but that awareness goes from personal to quite global in time, to where we really have a very, very vast sense of knowing. When that actually happens, we're actually benefiting our world, whether we're meaning to or not, whether it becomes apparent or not. Just developing that level of knowing and awareness, I think, makes a difference energetically to the planet we're on. That's truly inspiring. That's really inspiring. Again, some days we might wake up and go, benefit for all beings. I don't think so. I'm going back to bed. And we might wrap ourselves in the fabric of time and space and become a dense little black hole and bring the whole world in on ourselves. And we've all done that. And we all can do that. But at some point, it's self-serving and it's not getting us anywhere. The least we could do is that first level of motivation. Just get out. Don't be good. Don't try to be clear with your meditation. Just drag your butt to the cushion and sit there and check in with yourself. Be present with you. Try to reconnect and reestablish this feeling that you actually love this person you're working with. Even if you don't like them very much, that actually you kind of love this person and your relationship to you is the longest relationship you'll ever have in your life. The foundational level, the base level of the motivation is just to reconnect us, to be there for us. And as soon as the clouds part in a day or two, when we move out of that cycle of depression, self-recrimination, self-doubt, and we start to move to where we can actually deepen it, we remind ourselves that we're really on the path to enlightenment here. We're really on a path to waking up. And it's okay to fall off that path because it's a steep path. And then when it all starts to really clarify and we can remind ourselves that we're doing this for our family, we're doing this for the world, that becomes pretty cool. So those three motivations can be linear, or they could actually all happen in one session, really. You could begin with the first motivation of just getting yourself to the cushion, and then deepen your motivation and try to really begin to see your mind as it is, and then maybe do a little Tonglen or bodhicitta practice that opens your heart and connects you out to the world around you, or something like that. Yeah. So thanks so much for listening. Um, and the floor is open.